TEE1010. In this video I'm looking at the introduction of drums. I have pre-programmed the drums in various patterns which I can then use with the songs that have been programmed as well into the TEE1010. These three foot switches here, 6, 7 and 8, control the drums. 6 starts and stops the pattern, also starts and stops the synth at the same time. 7 and 8 go up and down drum patterns so you can have various layers of complexity. At the moment, if you look at the screen up in the top left hand corner, there's a little 4, and underneath that there's a 4/4. So the 4 means it's in complexity level 4 of drums, and 4/4 is the pattern that we're playing in, 4/4, which is pretty standard. So if I press 6, it'll start up. And if I change 7 and 8, I can change the patterns. So I've made the changes fairly subtle because I want them to actually change in intensity as I play, rather than having a whole lot of different patterns in the drums. As well as the patterns 0 to 11, there's also a count-in. Pressing this button here puts a little hash up there which indicates that it's in count-in mode. So when I press 6, we get so you can see it does a count-in. So let's turn that off for now. And we can go down the patterns and they become a lot simpler. Of course, you can make them what you like, because if you're programming it yourself, you can choose your own patterns. I'll show you that later. So let's turn that off. Okay, so the next thing I've got is also something called mixer mode. And in mixer mode, we can change the volumes and also the probabilities of each sound playing. So if I press this button here, it goes into mixer mode, and you can see up here in the right hand corner it's got a kick, which means it's the kick. It also means it's the acoustic kit. So if I change this knob here, I can change from acoustic to electronic. So let's just hear how that sounds. Probably needs something a bit more interesting, doesn't it? Okay, so with the mixer section, this knob here changes volume, this one probability, this one the kit. So by turning this knob I can change the volume. So let's move along to snare, and I'll play a pattern and I'll make the snare quieter. Now you'll notice that as I do this, nothing happens until the knob picks up the value that we're at, which is 1 for volume for the snare, and then I can bring it down. You can see these lines indicating what's going on. So now the snare's not playing. Now I can do the same thing with probability. At the moment the probability of the snare playing is 1. If I take this down a bit, the snare won't play quite as often. 74% chance of it playing. Okay, so let's get out of that now. I can just press this button here and it will leave mixer mode. So while it's playing, I can also change the swing. So down here in the right hand corner you can see these bars indicating what's going on. And if I change this knob here, so as well as having 4/4, there's also some other typical meters that you can have for a bar. At the moment it's in 4/4. If I press this button here, it'll go to 12/8. Probably doesn't fit with the bass all that well. And there's some jazz, and there's 11 patterns with jazz as well. Electronic. I quite like this beat. So there's a mixture of those as well. Okay, so with this new version I've introduced some extra oscillators. So if I go into mixer mode, you can actually see the oscillators. So there's the normal oscillator, synth. This next one here is Unison, and you can detune it. and this one's the sub oscillator. So I'll just play something again. And if I go back to the Unison one, at the moment it's got a volume of 0. I'll bring up its volume. So you can hear it's fattened up the sound a bit. Go to the sub, bring up its volume, and that's certainly fattening it up as well. Now when I'm out of mixer mode, I can change the detune with this. So that's detuning the two oscillators that are in unison, and you can hear that there's quite a beefy sound coming out of it now. So if you look at the top here, you can see I've changed the audio a lot. And let's have a look at the diagram from the website. You can see we've got an extra waveform for the sub oscillator and also for the Unison oscillator. Both the main and the Unison oscillators go through ladder filters. The sub oscillator just goes straight through an envelope to the mixer, which I've renamed mixer waves. And down here I've called this mixer drums, and everything's feeding into mixer out. So there's just a few different name changes there. I think it makes it easier to follow. So if we look down here, the first thing you notice after the change to the layout of the synthesizer parts, you can see I've had to include some extra files here and here. These are the drum kits. They're stored in files that look like this, and they need to be copied into the same folder as the program. You can find out how to generate these files by going to this website link here, which will tell you about how audio play memory works. So these are all just samples that are played when they're triggered. Okay, so the next section here is about the drums. So if we have a look at this part here in particular, this one is just to tell whether the drums are on or off, and whether they're acoustic or electronic drums, because we've got the two kits. We've got the 606 and the acoustic kits. Because I've got different bar types, which are 3, 4, jazz, etc., electronic, have different bar lengths for those, depending on whether it's in 12/8 or not. These character arrays are used to play the drums. I like this idea because when I'm programming the drums below, as I'll show you below, it's easy to see what's playing when. And it's just stored statically in the code. This section here, we've got the count in, which is just determine whether it does the 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4 count in, how complex the drums are, which beat we're onto, how much the swing is, and whether we can update the swing or the detune. Down here I've got master volume. These knob positions are being kept because the potentiometers are being used for more than one thing, and so I need to keep the values between changes. Can we update the BPM? Can we update the probability? That's all part of that system I explained earlier, where you turn the knob and it doesn't change until it actually latches onto the value that it previously was on. What sound we're actually going through when we're mixing, and here we've just got lists of the names to display when we're going through the mixer mode. These two things here are for probabilities and volumes to determine whether they can be changed or not, and these two arrays are to store the values for those things. Okay, notice I've changed this sol node to just S because I was running out of space for things on the screen, so I've changed that just to S instead of S, so SNG. If we go down to, all of this is still the same. If we go down to this section here in the setup, so we're in the setup, and what I've added in this part here, which is just the two extra waveforms with what types of waves they are. I'm using sawtooth for the Unison and triangle for the sub. And then here, this is a subroutine down below which sets the volumes. This random seed here is just being used to generate a set of random numbers based on one of the analog pins that isn't being used. If we go to the loop, you'll notice that there's some extra bits in here that I've changed. So this section here is changes as pedal mode 3, which is song mode. Instead of just playing a note, when the drums are on, it just sets the drums based on the patterns below, plays a note, plays a beat, and and otherwise turns off the oscillators. Also down here, because of swing, the spare time is adjusted and the wait time is adjusted because of the influence of swing. The swing adjustment is the value that's calculated below depending which beat of the bar it is. So some beats are longer than others. That's what gives the swing value. Okay, so now we get down to playing some stuff. So in this section here we're adjusting the swing. This part here is for when we're not in song mode, so just ignore the swing, make it stick on 1. And when we're in song mode, based on what the tick counter is, the swing adjustment is changed because of this one's making it longer, this one's making it shorter. So you get that swing feel. In this next part here, play beats, which was mentioned up here. Play beats. So here's the function for that. Play beats depending on whether it's the acoustic kit or the electronic kit. This section here is the bit that allows for probability of a particular sound to be played. Once the sounds have been played, under here you'll notice I've got a thing which chokes the hi-hat. An open hi-hat won't ring out if a closed hi-hat is played straight after it. And just increase the beat number depending whether we're at the end of the bar or not. Go back to 0 if we are. Alright, so all this is still the same as before. And we're now into reading the switches, so there's a few changes in there. This section here is for the drum switches. So if the drum switch is number 5, that's the one that turns on the drums and the pattern. This line does the counting that I showed previously. Need to toggle the drums on and off when that foot switch is pressed. Reset the beat and the song index and load the next pattern. If the foot switch being pressed is number 6, then we change the complexity down by 1, and if it's number 7 we go up by 1 and make sure we don't go below 0 or above 11. And this part was here before to preload the music from the EEPROM. Okay, so all of this is still the same. Then down here there's a section with the momentary switches, and this is all the part that goes through the mixer mode. So if we're not in song mode, we do this section from here to here, but if we're in song mode, we're doing this part here. And if the switch is the first one of the momentary switches, we're going through the beat types, which is the 4, 4, 3, 4, etc. If it's switch B2, then we're going through the mixer mode. And so if it's low, the most important things to start off with is we're making all these can updates false. So when we go to a new sound, it won't automatically change the values of those based on the latest pot readings. The sound index is which sound we're actually looking at in the mixer, and if we get too high we go back to 0. Okay, and 0 is when it's out of mixer mode. Also need to toggle whether that little hash comes up to show that we're in count in mode or not. This is just a button here to a shortcut going through all the sounds, so you can just press that one like an escape mode to get out of mixer mode. Okay. There are actually a couple of Easter eggs which I haven't mentioned earlier, but I'll play at the end of the video. So the Easter eggs are being checked here. If I press pedal 0 and pedal 1 and the drums are not on and we're in song mode, then Someone Told a Joke, which is the boom tish, will play. If we're in song mode and pedal 4 and 5 are pressed and the drums aren't on, or the pattern's not playing, then we get the big finish or the big ending being played. Whoops. Okay. So this is just the code for that. This just goes through and puts something on the screen that says boom tish and plays that sound. And this one's the one that goes boop boop ch, big finish. This is the code to do the counting, which just goes ch, 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 ch. Down here in read pots, so I've got some values here to store the values of the pots before they officially get changed over to the values they're meant to be reading. That's to the reason for that is to make sure that we don't get any issues with as you cycle through the sounds, the previous volume level gets assigned to the new sound when you don't really want it to. Okay, so if the current sound index is 0, which is not in mixer mode, we just need to check the volume like we did before. This section here is the part where a value gets read from the pot, but the value of the parameter that's meant to be stored doesn't get changed unless they are close to each other. So in other words, as you turn the knob, it picks up the value. So I read the value of the potentiometer, store it in this value here, volume knob position. Make sure it's not below 0 so we don't get any funny things going on. And if it's within this tolerance, we say that we can update the volume for that particular thing, which is the master volume. If you can update the volume, the master volume, actually it's changed. Now this seems weird that you're actually making it true here and then changing the value, but if this is not true, if this if isn't true, then the master volume doesn't get updated. But once it hits this once, then from then on, while we're turning the knob, it will follow it. And here's the volumes being actually altered. So this actual way of working is how I've done all the knobs as they're changing, so that they can only be changed once they get within a certain tolerance of their old value, and then it can change as much as you like. So here's the same thing with altering swing and altering Detune. So this part here is the same as before, but now we've got mixer mode here, and in mixer mode I'm doing the same thing with the pots, reading the value but not changing it unless it's within tolerance, or not allowing a change to start happening unless it's within these tolerances of these values. This section's for the volumes for each sound, and this section's for the probabilities for each sound, and this is changing the kit. Okay, as we go down here, in the screen mode at the bottom, in the show screen function, there was a big section in here which showed the song mode, but I've now put that in a separate function. And you can see that if the current sound index is bigger than 0, which means we're going through the mixer, then we're showing mixer screen as well instead with this function. So all this rest of it's down here is the same until we get to this part here, which is the show song mode, which is we've seen before. This section here is new, and that's because it's just showing things like the complexity of the drums, what sort of beat it is, and whether we're doing the count-in or not. This part here was previously in the other part of show display, so it's just been put down here instead. It just shows the BPM and whether we're in edit mode and things like that for the songs. This part here is showing the bars at the bottom of the screen, which is helping with the idea of the knobs picking up the values as they go through them. This is the section that just shows the mixer. Now underneath that we've got all the drum patterns. So the drum patterns are basically like this. If we're in the beat type 0, which is 3/4, then this is the pattern for complexity 0. Here's the pattern for complexity 1, and you notice they've just got X's in them. So this is saying the hi-hat should be played at these times. And so as you go through it, you can see that they become more complicated as it goes down the page. That's just the way I've done it, but you can do whatever you like if you're doing this. And there's 11 because it has to go up to 11. And then this section here is for 4/4. So 4/4 doesn't need to use the whole 24 characters in this array, so it stops at 16, which is just here, and so you can see it's a bit more compressed. And as you can see, there are more X's as you're going down, which indicates it's becoming more complicated, and so more extra things are being added to the beat. And that's the same for all of these other beats that I've done. So there's 12/8. The only thing is there's jazz, and the only other one is the electronic ones at the bottom. With the electronic ones, I found a website that showed how to play different sorts of beats. So this is meant to be Vanilla Ice Ice Baby. I just went through and picked ones that I liked. So these ones are not like the previous ones where they gradually get more complicated as you go down. So here's the famous Amen break, which I quite like. And this one here from Genesis' Mama, I quite like that one as well. But anyway, you can program whichever ones you want. And that's it. Last thing we've got is a couple of Easter eggs. The first one is when someone tells a joke, you want to have the boom tish. So here it is when I press 1 and 2 together. And if you finish a song and it's really exciting and you want a big finish, thanks for listening.